fire. While life's dark maze I tread, and grief around me spread, be thou my guide. Bid darkness turn to day, wipe sorrow's tears away, nor let me ever stray from thee aside. Now be dismissed, our class. Okay, we will conclude our study of David this evening. Like I said last week, you take a character like David, you really can't give it due justice in a quarter, but just kind of hit some of the high points and learn from those, and maybe one of these days pick up part 2. But we left last week in 2 Samuel chapter 7. He had just taken the throne, and they anointed him as king. And after the death of Saul and Solomon, that's 2 pretty astounding blows to a man. And we ended in chapter 7 with the promise that was made to David about through his seed will be the Christ will come, and upon his throne he will sit, his spiritual throne in heaven he will sit, the church will be established. I want to we're going to skip forward to chapter 13. We're going to hit the life of, we're going to talk about a little bit the first half of the class about Absalom and David's relationship. That was one of David's sons. And a lot of commentators, and I happen to agree with them whenever we see some verses that we'll read here in a moment, but a lot of commentators think that Absalom was David's favorite son to this point. I mean, you've got Solomon in there too, but a lot of commentators believe that David kind of leaned toward Absalom as his favorite. And but do anybody know before we get into this, what happened? What did Absalom do? What happened in that? Does anybody know by chance before we get off into it? I'm sorry? He killed his brother, Amnon. Why did he kill Amnon? Raped his sister, Tamar. Okay? But after that, Absalom does what? Do what? He rebels against his father David. And it's a sad story, but I want to look at this story with, we've looked at David this whole quarter, and I want, and my mind's been impressed with it. But as his character, as he's grown throughout from that young age of that teenager, back in chapter when Samuel anoints him, when he walks out amongst his 7 other brothers, from that time to now, we see that character build, his character grow, his love for God grows, and his respect for God continues to grow. And I want to, even with Saul, his experiences, all of his experiences with Saul, how his character continues to get stronger and more impressive. And now we're going to look at with keeping that first and foremost in your mind, let's look at what happened with Absalom. Okay, like we've already said, chapter 13, he had Amnon, he had his brother killed. He murdered his brother for raping Tamar. And afterwards, in the end of that chapter, verse 37, Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, and David mourned for his son every day. So after Absalom did this, he fled. We've talked a lot about that this quarter, about David spent half of this quarter fleeing from Saul. Well, here Absalom fled, and David mourned for his son every day. And so Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and he was there for 3 years. And look at verse 39. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. He longed to go forth unto Absalom. And he said, in the verse before it, he mourned for his son every day. So with those 2 verses alone, you can see how commentators come to the conclusion that Absalom, indeed, at this point in time, was his favorite son. Chapter 14, Absalom returns to Jerusalem after being gone for 3 years. He returns to Jerusalem, and if you look at verse 28, Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, and he did not see the king's face. So it's been a long time since he even seen him. But verse 24, the king said, let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, and he did not see the king's face. Now look at verse 25 and see if this verse sounds familiar. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. Who did that sound like? Saul. And we know what happened with King Saul. But here pretty much the same thing is said about Absalom. But he finally sees David, and down in verse 33 of that chapter. So Joab came to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. After not seeing him, he longed to see him for these years, and he finally gets to see him, and he kissed him. Now, chapter 15. And it came to pass after this that Absalom prepared his chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man that had a controversy came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, of what city art thou? And he said, thy servant is one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, see, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Absalom said, moreover, Oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. So here the plot begins. Absalom, his plot begins right here to dethrone his father, who loved him dearly, loved him so much. And then the verse 6, and on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So the plot is thickening. He's gathering his coup against his father, going against his father. David hears of the conspiracy and he leaves town. He flees town. You see that in the middle part of that chapter after he hears of Absalom getting together this plot. He leaves town. And, okay, here we go with the character of David. Notice David's reaction to Absalom's plotting. Look at verse 30 of chapter 15. And David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and he wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went up. So instead of David, it would seem like the natural reaction that you would have to something like this is to get extremely mad at your son for doing this to you. But this tore David's soul up. It was tearing him up inside. And it was that his favorite son was plotting against him. And now I want you to, verse 31, and one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. Now I want you to remember that name, Ahithophel. We're going to talk about him the latter part of this class. Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. He used to be with David, and now he's with Absalom. He's a traitor. In verse 33, Hushai, the Archite, he's with David. Okay? And they continue on with this plot. But Hushai is David's spy in this matter. And he ends up being a wonderful, wonderful asset to him. If you look at chapter 16, is the plot continues to thicken, and we get over to chapter 17. Hushai and Ahithophel, they're with Absalom, and they're ready to make a move against David. They're ready to, Absalom has stolen the hearts of the men of Israel. And he's ready to get his father kicked off the throne. And he's looking for advice. And in chapter 17, chapter 17, yes, verse 8, for Hushai said, he's talking to Absalom, you know your father and his men, that they're mighty men, and they be chafed in their minds as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field. And thy father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Verse 10, and he also that is valiant, whose heart is as the heart of a lion, shall utterly melt. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and they which be with him are valiant or mighty men. So what's Hushai telling Absalom? Remember who you're going up against. He's your father, but in a situation like this, more importantly, look, he's a mighty warrior, and all Israel knows it. He's smart. The Lord's with him. You don't believe that? You can ask Saul. And he's ready for you. So you better make sure you have your ducks in a row before you take him on. So the story continues, and they finally go to war. Chapter 18. Turn over to chapter 18. David numbered the people. I want you to look at this. Go back up to David's getting his men ready for war. Chapter 17, verse 22. Then David arose. You talk about being prepared. This is who you're dealing with here. David arose and all the people that were with him, and they passed over Jordan. By the morning light, there lacked not one of them that was not gone over Jordan. Now, skip down to chapter 18. And David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. And David set forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. Now, if you remember back when Saul took the throne and David first entered the scene, let me turn back, keep your finger there, and turn back to chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. Chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. The evil spirit came upon Saul again, verse 10. And he tried to kill David. That was the first attempt to kill David. And verse 12, Saul was afraid of David. And therefore Saul removed him from him and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. Look down at verse 16. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. What does that mean when it says it twice there? He went out and came in before the people. What does that mean? Does any other version say something differently? When you say, I look at that meaning that he's keeping everything on the table. He's not keeping anything hid from the people. And he's willing to do anything. If he's going to command you to do something, he's not going to command you to do something that he's not willing to do himself. He's going to go to bat for you. He's got your back. You've got his back. He's got your back. And that same thought, that same attitude is over in 2 Samuel chapter 18 when it says, I will surely go forth with you myself also. I'm ready to go to battle. Now look at verse 5 of chapter 2 Samuel 18. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man who? Even with Absalom. Don't kill him. Deal gently with him. He's going to be in this battle. He's the ringleader of this coup. But don't kill him. He's my son and I love him. Verse 6, so the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. And the rest of that next paragraph talks about Absalom escaping. He was on a mule and he got hung up under a tree, and he was kind of sitting there hanging by his head, and he got killed. They shot him with an arrow. Verse 14, then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. So you have the death of Absalom. His burial is verse 17. They put him in a great pit in the wood, and they laid a very great heap of stones upon him. Now, let's read verse 28. Absalom has been killed. David has not yet received the news. Here's where your story ends. Verse 28. And Ahimaaz called. He was the courier. He was the messenger. He called and said unto the king, All is well. And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king and said, Blessed be the Lord thy God, which hath delivered up the men that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, Is the young man Absalom safe? And he said, When Joab sent the king's servant and me thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. And the king said unto him, Turn aside and stand here. And he turned aside and stood still. And behold, Cushai came. And Cushai said, Tidings, my lord the king. For the Lord had avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. And the king said unto Cushai, Is the young man Absalom safe? Is he alive? He's wanting to know, is my son still alive? Did he survive this battle? Please tell me. And Cushai answered, The enemies of my lord the king and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. A very popular verse here. And as he went, thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. A very sad ending to a very sad story. David, his favorite son, plotting against him, trying to dethrone him, take him off the throne, kill his army. But yet, after it's all ended, David has that to say, O my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. Very sad story. Any questions about that? I wanted to touch that before we went on and got any questions about Absalom? Anything anybody wants to add to that? Okay. Now, chapter 11. Put it in reverse, and let's go to chapter 11. This is the story of David and Bathsheba. And I told you last week that, we were going to look at this. And I'll keep in mind now, the character, what David's character has become. I mean, he was a mighty man. He was a man after God's own heart. He's been tested and tried, and he's passed. And a lesson here for all of us is that no matter what stage you are, no matter if you've been a Christian for 3 months or 63 years, it's never a good time to let your guard down. And there's a great lesson here with David. In that scene in chapter 11, look at verse 1 of chapter 11. And it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle. David's supposed to go to battle with his men. Kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But look at the last sentence of that verse. David wasn't with them. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. He stayed at Jerusalem by himself while all of his servants, or all of his men of war and his colonels and his lieutenants were gone. He stayed at Jerusalem by himself. Red flag number 1. And the story progresses there where he goes up on his rooftop and he sees Bathsheba bathing. And he sent messengers to her. And she came in and he laid with her. Now, it says in verse 3 that Bathsheba is the daughter of Eliam. Turn over to chapter 23. skip over, keep your finger there, and turn over to chapter 23. The last half of this chapter is a catalog of David's mighty men. And if you look, you remember Ahithophel that I mentioned to you a while ago? Ahithophel used to be in David's army. He became a traitor and went to serve under Absalom. Okay, this has happened. The Absalom story is after this one. We're not going in chronological order here. We're kind of backing up. But Ahithophel traded and went over with Absalom. Now look at verse 34 of 23. Eliphalet, the son of Ahasbai, the son of Makathite, then Eliam is the father of Bathsheba. Eliam is the son of Ahithophel. So that makes Ahithophel Bathsheba's grandfather. Now, I think we kind of know why that Ahithophel switched armies and went to Absalom. He's wanting to get back to David for doing his granddaughter wrong. So that gives you kind of a light there on what transpired there. So Bathsheba was the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. David sent messengers for her. And so you have the story here of when Bathsheba becomes pregnant, and David, he starts trying to hide what he's done. He lied about it. He's tried to hide it. He abused his office. What did he try to get Joab to do? What did David try to get Joab, or he did get Joab to do? What did he get Joab to do with Uriah? Do I? Put him on the front lines of battle and come and draw back. Okay? Because we've got to get him out of the picture. If you look at verse 6 of 11, David sent to Joab saying, "Go get me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent Uriah to David. And look at verse 7. When Uriah was coming to him, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did, and how the war prospered. Do you think David didn't know that already? David knew that already. He knew how things were going. Joab would tell him. He didn't need Uriah there to tell him. And then verse 8, David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. But Uriah did not go back to his house. David tried several times to get him to go down to his house. Uriah, verse 9, slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and he went not down to his house. And when they had told David that Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, "Comest thou not from thy journey? Why then didst thou not go down unto your house?" And look at verse 11. This says a lot about the character of Uriah. Uriah would not return to his house, to Bathsheba. And here's why. Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents. And my lord Joab and the servants of my lord, they are encamped in the open fields." They're at war. That's where I need to be. I'm a man of war. That's where I need to be. You called me in. You've given me a leave of absence. This is pretty much David giving Uriah a leave of absence to return home so he can assist David in hiding his sin with Bathsheba. He returns back home, but he will not go to his house. But read the rest of that verse. They are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go unto mine house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As thou livest and as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And David said to Uriah, you stay here until the tomorrow, and I will send you on your journey. Well, before he did that, what did David do to him? He tried to get him, he got him drunk, hoping that, again, that would send him to his house, but he still didn't go back to his house. He slept at the gate. He did not go to his house, verse 13. Verse 14. Now, you talk about something very out of character with David. It came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. That's that letter that said, Joab, put him on the front lines. Uriah, he had Uriah send that letter, hand deliver it to Joab. And Joab opened it and read it, and that's what Joab did. He put Uriah on the front line, and it got him killed. Uriah was not privy at all what the contents of that letter was. But here you have him, and verse 17, Uriah the Hittite died. Yes, sir.
Not only did he have him killed, he ensured his death to be certain by pulling the armies back and leaving him there
all by himself. He was there by himself. Exactly. Verse 26 and 27, Uriah, look at the reaction of Bathsheba, and look at the reaction that the Lord had. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned. Verse 27, when the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife, and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. There's the Lord's reaction. The Lord is not pleased. Here's the first, I think this is pretty much the first time this is said about David, that the Lord is displeased with David, and rightfully so. Verse 12 gets us in to that famous parable that Nathan the prophet gave about the rich man and the poor man. The visitor shows up and to the rich man's house, and instead the rich man had all the sheep that you could, numerous sheep, numerous flocks and herds, but the poor man only had one that they had nursed from a baby. Even his children loved it. And he looked at it at his own. The poor man looked at that lamb as his own daughter, the text says. And here the rich man takes that one sheep from the poor man and prepares it for the meal. Well, when Nathan tells this story to David, David becomes angry, rightfully so. And Nathan says, "You're the man." David says, "Who did this? He deserves to die. He needs to die immediately. The immediate judgment needs to be brought out on this person." And Nathan says, "Thou art the man. You're the man, David, we're talking about." Well, once David hears that, he becomes penitent. Judgment is brought down upon David and his household. The sword, verse 10, the sword shall never depart from your house. And David, verse 13 rather, David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." There you have his confession. Psalms 51, you go back and read Psalms 51 about David's confession. Now, what happens to this baby? The baby is born. What happened? What does the Lord do to this baby? He dies. Okay? The Lord strikes him with an illness, and the baby is sick for 7 days. And look at verse 16. David besought God for the child. He prayed to God. He fasted. He went in and he lay all night upon the earth. The elders of the house arose. David never ate with them. He didn't eat. He fasted. And on verse 18, the 7th day, the child died. And after the child dies, I want you to look at David's reaction. Verse 20. David arose from the earth. He washed and anointed himself. He changed his apparel. He washed and got cleaned up. And he came into the house of the Lord and worshiped. He came into the house of the Lord and worshiped. And that it puzzled the servants. Lord, you've been fasting. You've been weeping. You've been on the ground for a solid week because the child was sick. And now he's dead. And now you're up and going again. You're eating. Why? Why are you reacting like this? And if you look over to verse 22, David said, while the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who can tell whether God will be gracious to me that the child may live? He wasn't giving up. Now verse 23, but now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? No. I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. I shall go to him, but he shall... Read that verse with David's intent. What was David's intent when he said, I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me? What was his intent? Do what? The resurrection. David made his mind up that he's going to live his life to where one of these days he's going to see that baby. He's going to live faithful life to where I'll go to him because I know he's not going to return to me. We've all lost family members, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, grandparents, aunts, uncles. We've all lost them, and we're saddened by that. But look at what David said, and that should be our attitude. We'll go to them because they're not going to come back to us. That gives you incentive, motivation to live the Christian life the way it should be lived. Look at what the intent that David had. That man after God's own heart. He was going to go to him because that baby would not return back again. Thank you for the quarter, for the study. Who's teaching next quarter? Bruce in here? Okay, I don't know what he's going to teach on. But anyway, thank you for your comments and questions.